Okay, let's talk about synths. Hiya! Hello! Excuse my cracked voice. I've been shouting, now I can be louder than everyone else, which is good. Good for me. This is the Arturia MicroBrute, which is an analog synth made by a company who make software, which is kind of weird. But they did have some pedigree. They already made an analog synth before this one called the MiniBrute, which was bigger and equally as analog. In fact, the MiniBrute was an awesome synth, and it set a price threshold that I don't think had quite been matched before. So it was a very affordable machine. It was about £450. This thing is £250, so it's even less than the big one. But actually, it packs a lot of the same functionality, a lot of the power of the bigger MiniBrute into a little tiny package. But with some very clever tricks up its sleeve. It does some things that even the more expensive MiniBrute didn't do. So it's an analog synth, and it's based on designs from this chap called Yves Song, who is a DIY synth manufacturer and designer in Grenoble, where Arturia are based. And Arturia got Yves in and asked him to consult. And he came up with a bunch of this concept of this complex single oscillator synthesizer. So it's just one oscillator, which means that we can only have, one root note playing. We can't do kind of detuning. But that one oscillator is very complex. It has a bunch of different wave shapes. So let's look at them here. This is the oscillator section. So this is the sub-oscillator. So we have this kind of deep, like one octave shifted below sub. If I bring in a higher note, you'll hear the relationship. Very fat. But we have a special power here, so we can turn this up a fifth. So actually, we are kind of getting a detuned effect, which would only be achievable with two oscillators, but it's kind of one oscillator that's been cleverly configured. So yeah, we've got other wave shapes here. Let's try our friend the triangle. So the saw, I should say. But it has this thing called ultra saw, which is like a kind of phase-shifted copy of the saw waveform. And now let's get into the mod matrix and start making that dance, basically. So, oh, sorry. What, of the synth or the? I need you to turn it down, basically. We're too loud. Gutted. I thought I could be louder still. Well, maybe not. Okay, well, let's be more polite. So, we have this thing called the mod matrix, which is a semi-modular control voltage patch bay, which is awesome. This thing costs £250 and is semi-modular. You can see here we have two CV outputs. This is envelope, so the envelope sends a control voltage, and LFO, so the LFO sends a control voltage. And by default, there is a routing here. The envelope controls a thing called the metallizer, and the LFO goes to pitch. So when I start applying the LFO, you hear it getting sent to the pitch. But if I take one of these twee little patch cables that you get with the synth, I can patch the LFO to a different destination. I'm going to send it to the ultra saw, which is here. So saw. So now, when I play with the LFO, you can hear this kind of detuned, phasey kind of thing, which sounds like a bunch of oscillators together, but it's not. It's just one really complicated oscillator doing its thing. We can blend that in with the sub. Super cool. The square wave has pulse width modulation, which is kind of we know about pulse width modulation. It's shortening the width of the square wave. Sounds nice too. But the really weird one is the triangle. So the triangle has this thing called the metallizer, and it's basically an analog wave folder. And wave folders are typically found on modular synthesizers. It's very rare to find a fixed architecture synth that has a folder, but the MiniBrute did, and so does this. So what the metallizer does is it takes this simple waveform. I will. So, hang on, let me just turn this down, turn this up. There we go. So, it does this kind of crazy mad sort of wild sound thing, which you can modulate. So if you use the LFO again, and we send it here to metal, start to get these kind of really crazy. Woo! That's the filter. So it has this really aggressive filter. It's called the Steiner-Parker filter. And the Steiner-Parker filter is an old DIY design which was hacked and adapted into the MicroBrute, well, to the Mini originally, and also the MicroBrute. And it's got a really kind of acidy characteristic. Get the sub in, you can get tons of resonance. And you don't lose bass as you do on certain filter designs. So it keeps the bass, you can just make it even more aggressive. And it's got like an innately crazy character. There's like settings where you can make it do this sort of weird warbly thing. There you go. It's just bonkers. It's a really weird thing. Full of character. And we have different modes here. We've got low pass, old classic low pass, but you also have band pass. It just sounds mega aggressive. And then high pass. Of course, we can modulate the filter itself, so. You see here I'm using the mod wheel to control the amount of LFO modulation. So you can sort of set it up, but it's not doing anything until I do this. So you can get these kind of like DJ choppy effect, which is really fun. We like. We do have this thing called brute factor here. And brute factor is a feedback path, basically. So it's feeding the output of the synth internally back into itself. And doing all kinds of weird, wild things. You can sort of age the sound of the machine using brute factor. So you can have a relatively polite. Let me just get this. Hear it like sort of squaring off and softening. But at like high settings, there's no oscillators here. That's just all, like all feedback. And if you get it in a certain place, it does this weird kind of feedback things that make just ultra dirty bass notes, which you can't control with pitch. They're just wild. But you could sample them and turn them into a sound. You know, this thing can spit out all kinds of weird waveforms. So we have an envelope generator here, which is very straightforward. We know what envelope generators do. And we can use that as a modulation source, of course. We can like modulate not just with the LFO, but so here by default the envelope is controlling that metalizer function, and here's the amount control. So you can sort of share the control, so the envelope can be opening the filter and dialing in an amount of metalizer hill. Started to do this kind of wild, cool. We like. We have glide, so you can have kind of slide between notes. Ooh, get that down. And you've got an amount to sort of control the speed of the glide. And then the last and most awesome thing that this has is a sequencer. So obviously it was a thing that we found on some old machines, like the Roland SH101 had a step sequencer built into it, kind of similar implementation as this. And it really transforms what the machine is capable of doing. Because if you've got a sequencer, I'll show you. So you have a rate control here, and you have 8 different patterns that you can store and save in the machine. When you turn them off and on, it remembers the sequences. And you can use a piece of software that's free. You connect via USB to sort of dump all of your sequences and load them up. So if you've got ones you like, you can save them. What you do is you arm record like this, and then Sounds pretty wild because we've got a very strange set of controls going on, but we just stored the pattern into the sequence. So if I then just get a more conventional sound going, the machine is now playing through that sequence of notes that we played. I didn't do it, but we could introduce rests, which is just an empty note, so you don't have to have a constant stream of notes. But it's just awesome here, so you've now got the machine just going off on its own, and you can just mess around. And if we push the notes on the keyboard, we can transpose. The moment I've got it set so that it will reset and start playing a sequence again, if we load up that piece of software, we can change it so that it will always transpose on the beat. I actually prefer setting it up like that. Should have done that first. But you can set it up that way, and once you turn it off and on, it will just remember those settings until you decide to change them again. And then you can change patterns on the fly. And then you can just start messing around with the synth. There's loads of fun things you can do. It's hard to play it in a kind of DJ way. Finding different combinations of waveforms. Oh, the LFO here has two sync modes. One is free, where it's free to just roll around and be crazy on its own. The other one is a sequencer sync, so that when we have a melody like this going along, our LFO will stay musically clocked to that like master sort of sound. Let me just actually get the LFO doing something cool, which is, let's modulate the filter. So if I slow down the sequence, the LFO slows down as well. And there's like little divisions that I can use. And this musical sequence that we're making can be synchronized via MIDI or USB. There's MIDI and USB on the back of this thing. And also there's control voltage inputs and outputs. So if you had a drum machine, like, you know, there's a bunch of drum machines now that actually do have control voltage gate outputs, like the Korg Volkers, they have clock outputs. You can clock a MicroBrute from a Volker. So you could have a drum machine and a MicroBrute, and you could be playing your patterns and sequences, and your drum machine and this machine will stay locked in time together so that you can just play live, which is so fun, like to get away from using a computer just exclusively for making sequences. I love being able to just make a melody on this thing, mess around, come up with ideas, maybe print it all into my DAW as I go, and then at the end you've got this big long jam. You take all the little best bits, chop them up, make a whole track out of them. And there's just so many different sounds this thing can make. It might look simple, but with the modulation possibilities, there's just tons of things we can do. You see here, oh, frustratingly, I only have one LFO output. What if I want to send the LFO to multiple destinations? Well, get resourceful, you can. So get yourself a little splitter, like the kind that you use for a headphone, or there's these cables which are made by a company called Tip Top Audio. These are called stack cables. They cost about £6 each. They come in smaller sizes than this. But what they let you do, I'll show you with this, because it's certainly a cheaper option. These are about £1. You know, if you just plug in your two cables, well, if I stick that into the LFO, I now have two outputs. So let's put it into the metalizer and the sub. So I can then modulate two different things at the same time. And really, there's nothing to stop you from modulating even more things. They'll take some load, so you can send them to a bunch of different destinations. That's very weird, very wild. Fun in a box. So that's kind of the MicroBrute, really. Very simple, but really, really full of character, with a complex oscillator that you can use in a bunch of different ways. Tons of modulation possibilities, and if you go nuts and you buy yourself lots of analog synthesizers, there's nothing to stop you plugging these into other devices. They don't have to just be plugged into the MicroBrute. If you've got like a Moog or something like that, you know, you want to use its control voltage inputs, you can use this as a way of sending modulation to those things. Or if you've got guitar pedals, which have expression inputs, you can send control voltages into guitar expression pedal inputs and modulate them using the LFO that's in the MicroBrute. So, or the envelope, you know, and you can tie them together, plug the output of the MicroBrute into that thing, and create all these kinds of modulation sort of interrelationships, which just lead to more musical fun and craziness. So that's the MicroBrute. We're at stand A59, which is just down here. We've got a bunch of MicroBrutes set up, so if you want to come and have a play and mess around for yourself, please come and ask questions and have a play. Thanks very much, guys. Cheers.